Hello, fifth grade, and welcome to Chapter 1 of Social Studies. This chapter is going to focus on the land and native peoples of North America. So our essential question here is, how were the lives of native peoples influenced by where they lived? In this chapter, we're going to read about groups who lived in the Americas before the arrival of Christopher Columbus and other European explorers. We're going to look at how native peoples' locations influenced their daily lives. We're also going to learn more about their cultures and their heritage. Now here you can see a map that shows you the migration routes, how people have slowly moved down and spread out through North America. We have our timeline at the bottom that you can go ahead and look at in your textbook that shows you how they progressed. All right, let's take a look at our workbook, and then we're going to read in our textbook. So you're going to use your investigative skills to examine how early Native American groups lived in different regions and developed special characteristics. This will help you understand how the regions in which they lived affected the development of their special characteristics. Now, when you get to these first two pages in your workbook, you're going to have these blue bars that have information and questions on them on the side. We're going to go through and read the directions there so we can complete those instructions and complete those tasks while we read before we move on. So number 1 says, look, read the caption below the map. What do you think the term land bridge means? Circle the words on the map that identify land areas and bodies of water. Trace possible migration routes followed by early humans. Discuss with a partner how the last ice age caused early humans to migrate to North America. So any written portions you can put in the My Notes section. You'll go ahead and do the circling and tracing that they ask you for throughout your workbook page. You can write on your workbook. Please do not write at all in your textbook. For number 2, it says, look again, underline words in the text and explain how the spread of glaciers during the ice age caused Beringia to develop. Examine. Look back at the map. How does the map show the outline of Beringia? How does it show the outline of current land masses? And number 3, make connections. Use the symbols on the map. Discuss with a partner the type of ice age animals that early human hunters followed in North America. What does this tell you about the hunting skills of these early humans? Let's go ahead and start reading. Early humans in North America. Many major ice ages have taken place in Earth's history. During these periods, sheets of ice thousands of feet thick covered vast areas of land. With so much seawater trapped in ice sheets or glaciers, sea levels dropped. Dry land appeared in some places. During the last major ice age, from about 3,000 to 30,000 to about 12,000 years ago, sea levels dropped very low. One theory is that a land bridge formed between the northeast tip of Asia and the northwest tip of North America. Scientists refer to this land area as the Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia. Herds of ice age animals moving from Asia to North America across Beringia look for food. Many scientists think that early humans from Asia allowed the animals they hunted across the land bridge, or they followed them across the land bridge. My apologies. Sometimes a hunting trip could take many days. The hunters had to gather plants to eat until they were able to kill an animal. The plants they gathered included berries, grasses, and mushrooms. This is why we call these people hunter-gatherers, because they did both of those things. Scientists think that humans first reached North America sometime between 30,000 and 12,000 years ago. Once in North America, these early humans may have migrated southward on land. Another possibility is they avoided the ice by traveling in boats along the Pacific coast. So go through, circle words on the map that identify land areas and bodies of water. Write down what you think a land bridge means in your notes area. Underline words and text that explain how the spread of glaciers during the ice age caused Beringia to develop. So go through the instructions on this page. Please do your work neatly. Next, we're going to go on to page 10. And here our focus is going to be on analyzing information. So to analyze information means you have to break the information down into parts and look at how those parts fit together. Analyzing information will help you figure out what it means and which parts are useful. Now, in order to analyze information, you're going to go through a few steps. You're going to read the text all the way through once. This will give you a general idea of the information. You're going to look closely at the sources of information. So are these sources trustworthy or accurate? You're going to ask questions about what you're reading, such as who, what, where, when, and why questions. That'll help you break down the information. And then you're going to note any important patterns or relationships that you see throughout the reading. So our first graphic organizer here has 3 sections. We have the location, we have the surroundings, and we have the way of life. So our first part says Beringia and North America during the last ice age. Now, the surroundings, we know that they were, based on our reading, that they were surrounded by thick sheets of ice that covered large areas of land, and animals roamed around that region, and we believe a lot of them crossed over into North America through that land bridge. The way of life over there is that people took long hunting trips and gathered plants, so they were hunter-gatherers, and they relied on the plants that they gathered to eat when they weren't able to find an animal or until they were able to find an animal. Next, we're going to take a look at pages 10 to 19 in your research companion. That's your textbook. And you're going to use your skills to fill in the information in this graphic organizer here. So here, what you're going to do is choose a single Native American group that's talked about in the text and give information in the chart about that group only. You don't need to do all the groups, just pick one group, where they were located, tell me about their surroundings, and tell me about their way of life. All right, so let's go to page 10 in your textbook. How did characteristics of early Native American groups develop? And we're going to start reading. First, hunter-gatherers. The first humans to settle the Western Hemisphere were probably hunter-gatherers from Asia. These early humans lived by gathering wild plants and hunting animals. Many scientists today believe they reached North America by crossing a land bridge from Asia that formed when sea levels dropped during the last ice age. For thousands of years, the land bridge, which scientists call Beringia, linked what is now Siberia to Alaska. Herds of ice age animals crossed Beringia. The early humans hunted animals, which included elephant-like woolly mammoths and mastodons. An ice age mastodon was nearly as large as a modern elephant. It had short, powerful legs and long, sharp tusks. Its tough hide was covered with long reddish-brown hair. To hunt such a dangerous animal, early humans would have needed effective weapons and teamwork. Archaeologists are people who study the tools and other artifacts of people who lived long ago. Using such evidence, they reach conclusions about how ancient people lived. Archaeologists have different views about exactly when early humans first reached North America. They have evidence that these people had migrated all the way to the southern tip of South America by 10,500 BC. The people's migrations must have taken place over a long time, so their arrival in North America likely occurred centuries earlier. Archaeologists also have different views on which route or routes these early Native American groups might have used in their migration throughout North America and South America. Some scientists think they used ice-free inland routes. Others think early humans traveled by boat along the Pacific coast. Did you know? Beginning in the 1930s, archaeologists started to find evidence that early Native Americans may have hunted large ice animals. Scientists found slim, beautifully crafted stone spear points mixed in with the bones of extinct animals, such as mammoths. The first site where these spear points were found was present-day Clovis, New Mexico. Spear points discovered recently along Buttermilk Creek in Texas date from between 13,500 and 15,500 years ago. So think about the routes that different archaeologists assumed that people took. What would cause people to take these particular routes? How did taking these routes affect their lifestyle and the way that they lived? Think about that as you go through. The Olmec. About 11,500 years ago, the last ice age ended. The climate of the Western Hemisphere slowly grew warmer and drier. Many of the Ice Age animals that the early Native Americans had hunted became extinct. These hunter-gatherer cultures had to adapt to survive. Instead of gathering wild plants, they began to grow their own food. By about 4000 BC, farmers in Mexico and Central America were raising three crops: maize, which we also know as corn, beans, and squash. One of the most important effects of farming in the community is that the community can raise more food than it needs to feed itself. This food surplus allows members of a community to focus on civic and cultural developments in the arts, society, and government that help build an advanced civilization. The first civilization to develop in the Western Hemisphere was started by the Olmec people. It developed in the hot rainforests of southern Mexico about 12,000 BC. The Olmec built temples, carved huge stone statues, played ball games, and created a calendar with a writing system. They spread their culture across Mexico and Central America through an effective trade network. So why is food surplus important in the growth of a civilization? Why is it important to have extra food? Now, you want to make sure that you're able to feed all of your people. You can also use that extra food to trade with other groups that live around or nearby to get things that you need. The Maya. The Maya developed their culture in the same part of Mexico as the Olmec. They traded with their Olmec neighbors and were influenced by their culture. Between AD 250 and 900, Maya culture reached its peak. Archaeologists called this the Classic period of Maya civilization. During the Classic period, the Mayan world grew to more than 40 cities, each with a population of about 5,000 to 50,000. In cities such as Uxmal, Tikal, and Copan, the Maya built great palaces for their rulers and huge pyramid temples to honor their gods. These structures were covered with elaborate carvings and inscriptions in their system of writing. Scholars often refer to such inscriptions as hieroglyphs. The meaning of these inscriptions was unknown for centuries after Maya civilization collapsed. Thorough translations appeared in the mid-1900s. Maya cities were ruled by kings who claimed that Maya gods had chosen them. The rulers directed huge building projects and commanded the army. To form alliances and strengthen trade, Maya rulers often married members of the royal families of other cities. Mayan civilization declined rapidly after AD 900. Archaeologists have looked for explanations in the environment. They think that as time passed, the population of the Maya cities outgrew the food supply. Rulers fought over farmland. People began to abandon the Maya cities in search of food. Drought may have also led to their decline. However, the Maya did not disappear. Today, more than 6 million descendants of the ancient Mayans still live in Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala. Did you know? The Mayans were fascinated with time. They created a 365-day calendar. The year was divided into 18 months of 20 days each. The remaining 5 days were not shown in any month, and the Mayans believed those days were unlucky. To show when historical events took place, they used a system of dating called the long count. Translated to today's calendar, the Mayans' long count suggested the world was created around 3114 BC. So here you can see a picture of some of the Mayan temples and designs and influences for their Aztec stone calendars. So you can pick either one of these two groups that we've talked about so far to start filling in your graphic organizer with. Let's continue reading. Early desert people. The early Native American groups of the Southwest developed in an environment very different from the rainforests of Mexico and Central America. About AD 200, a group known as the Hohokam moved from a part of the Sonoran Desert into northern Mexico, present-day Arizona, between the Salt River and the Gila River. At the time, the area received only about 3 inches of rain each year. Yet the settlers discovered ways to turn the desert into fields of corn, beans, squash, and cotton. Hohokam built a complex irrigation system to bring water to their fields. With simple tools such as sharpened sticks and stone blades, they dug shallow canals that stretched for hundreds of miles. Hohokam farmers used small gates to direct water from these canals into their fields. The Hohokam irrigation canals were built so well that some of them are still used today. Hohokam farmers lived in small villages. They built their houses by digging a shallow pit and covering it with a wooden frame, roofed with plant materials called thatch. Building underground helped to keep the Hohokam houses cool during the day and warm at night. Hohokam wove cotton into cloth for clothing. They made baskets and pottery for storage. Hohokam jewelry was crafted from turquoise mined from the desert and from shells. Shell jewelry was especially prized. Hohokam traders traveled long distances to trade cotton cloth and pottery for shells gathered by people on the Gulf of California and the Pacific coast. Ancestral Pueblo people built the Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde, which is now in Colorado. So here you can take a picture. You can take an idea of some of these housings by looking at this picture. The Ancestral Pueblo were another of the Native American groups settled in the deserts of the Southwest. In about AD 700, the Ancestral Pueblo people settled in the Four Corners area where Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet today. Like the Hohokam, the Ancestral Pueblo planted squash, corn, and beans. The high desert plateaus where they lived were not suited to the use of canals for irrigation, however. Instead, the Ancestral Pueblo developed a method called dry farming. They channeled rainwater and snowmelt into catch basins. Then this water was slowly released into narrow, pebble-lined drains in the crops. The Ancestral Pueblos were known as the first cliff dwellers. They lived in huge apartment-like dwellings built along the steep sides of the cliffs. Living in cliff dwellings, such as Mesa Verde, made it easy for the Ancestral Pueblo to defend themselves against enemies. These dwellings were made of finely carved stone and logs that were plastered with adobe. Adobe is a mixture of mud and straw that dries into a hard clay. An adobe house stays cool during the heat of the day and warm during the cold desert nights. So here, if you take a look at the map, you can see where the Hohokam and the Ancestral Pueblo lived. Here you can see the Four Corners area. And here you can see Mesa Verde again, where the Ancestral Pueblo people lived, or one of the things that they built where they lived. All right. Let's move on to our next pages. So we read about the Ancestral Pueblo. We read about the Hohokam on these 2 pages. Next, we're going to read about the mound builders. As Europeans began to settle the Ohio and Mississippi rivers in the 1700s, they encountered a variety of earthen mounds. Some were cone-shaped hills, others were earthen walls. A few even had the shapes of animals. The most amazing of these is the Great Serpent Mound in southern Ohio, which is more than 1,300 feet long. The people who built these mysterious structures and then left were once referred to simply as mound builders. Archaeologists have identified several different mound builder cultures. The earliest of these cultures is known as the Adena, after a site in Ohio where archaeologists first studied their mounds. The Adena culture lasted from about 500 BC to AD 100. These people lived in villages of round houses built from logs and roofed with bark. Originally, hunter-gatherers, the Adena people later began to farm. Their crops included gourds and sunflowers. The Adena used stone to craft both simple tools and complex objects, such as smoking pipes used in rituals. They fashioned ornaments from copper, mica, and shells, material that they obtained through trade with distant peoples. What is known about the Adena culture comes from such objects, which the Adena people placed in their burial mounds that they built for their dead. Between about 200 BC and 500 AD, another mound-building culture called the Hopewell occupied the same region as the Adena culture. The Hopewell people were also named for a site in southern Ohio where the archaeologists first studied their culture. The Hopewell people shared many features of the Adena culture. Hopewell artists created objects from copper, mica, and obsidian, and volcanic glass. Like the Adena people, the Hopewell obtained these materials through far-flung trade networks. So here you can see the Great Serpent Mound. You can see that it's kind of shaped like a serpent or a snake. That's where it got its name. All right, then and now. Archaeologists have been studying the Cahokia mounds since the late 1800s, but only a small part of the site has been excavated. 70 of the original 120 mounds are preserved today in Illinois' Cahokia Mound State Historic Site, established in 1979. Cahokia was named a World Heritage Site in 1982, meaning it deserves special protection. One of the last major Native American groups to develop before the arrival of Europeans was the Mississippian culture. Mississippian culture developed from the Mississippi River Valley between AD 700 and 900. Large-scale farming of corn, beans, squash, and other crops produced food surpluses. This encouraged the growth of land populations in the Mississippian towns and cities. Priest kings ruled Mississippian society. Each town or city controlled a group of outlying villages. High fences of sharpened logs defended each village from attack. Warfare seems to have been frequent. The great Mississippian city is the site known today as Cahokia. Built in what is now southern Illinois, Cahokia at its peak was home to more than 20,000 people. A plaza for holding ceremonies was the center of a Mississippian city. Around the plaza were groups of mounds, on top of which might have been temples or a chief's dwelling. Monk's mounds at Cahokia were 100 feet high and covered 14 acres. It was the large pre-Columbian earthen structure in the largest pre-Columbian earthen structure in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, that takes us to the end of our reading. So now you're going to pick one of the groups that we talked about and talk about the location of that group. So give me the name and where they were located. What were some of their surroundings? So what was around them? And how did it affect their way of life? So what kind of homes did they have? What kind of food did they eat? What kind of environment did they live in? Once you've completed that, we're going to go on to our next pages that have 2 writing sections for you to complete. The first writing section says, write about it. Take a stand. Write a brief 3-page informational essay describing how the location and surroundings of the Native American group you chose influenced the way people lived. So here you're going to pull from the information from our previous page. The same group you took notes about in the graphic organizer is the group you're going to write about here. So write 3 paragraphs. Please make sure you're using complete sentences and punctuation. Make sure that you're telling the name of the group, the geographic area where that group lived, and how that area affected the development of special characteristics of that group of people. Now, over here on the Connect to the Essential question, it says, think about the people who've learned about, or think about the people that you've learned about in this lesson. How did location and surroundings affect the way early Native American groups lived? So here you can talk about how the geography affected it, the various different things that they found in their areas, the resources they had. You can outline that in a few sentences. Once you've completed that and gone back and checked your writing and your spelling, you're done with this lesson. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.